Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be battling a mysterious sea civilization in Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, and then trying to save our brother's failing restaurant in The Bear. But before all of that, Nick, what have you been up to recently?
Well, I read the first story arc of a recent comic from Image. This is Public Domain, written and drawn by Chip Zdarsky, who's better known for a number of things. He was known first as an artist in the relatively successful comic Sex Criminals from a while ago. Good title on that comic. And
that is a good title.
He's also since found possibly even more success as a writer for both Marvel and DC. He's currently writing both Daredevil and Batman, which is really sweeping the boards on a certain type of sad urban character. But yeah, this is his personal project for Image, which he's both writing and drawing, and it's basically literally a comic about comics. It's a story about the creators of a superhero called The Domain, who has, in true comic book style, gone on to become a massive success in transmedia terms. But of course, one of the creators has inevitably been somewhat screwed over. This is one of the protagonists, Sid Dallas, who has been basically entirely stripped of the rights to his incredibly famous creation, and his sons are at various levels frustrated and or glad and or both that their father doesn't have this ridiculous level of fame, even though, the money would be kind of nice. He has a slightly strained relationship with his wife over this. And yeah, in the early issues of the series, I think this is probably early enough not to count as a massive spoiler, he stumbles upon some paperwork which proves that he might actually have more of a claim to the character than he thought he did. And the first storyline in the series, it is an ongoing, so we've only got to the first big story point. There's more to come. So the first story deals with the fallout of that and what he wants to do with it and stuff like that and how it affects his family. Yeah, it's quite a sort of down to earth, low level family saga. It kind of reminds me of a lot of premium telly shows over the years, stuff about complicated relationships within families who have these sort of weird quirks about them, Succession, 6 Feet Under, that sort of thing. Bit like that, only it's about comics and is a comic.
Yeah, I could really imagine this being, like a premium TV drama, the way you describe it. Yeah, it reminds me of, there's a lot of media of creatives focused on the creative process and the creative industry. Maybe a bit of the music parts from Espidere Street thrown in, or possibly maybe in a slightly less pretentious way, Birdman, with him reconciling his superhero media identity. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like familiar ground, but that's not sort of a veiled criticism, I guess. With all these things, what's important is the story you tell, even if it's the kind of screwed over creative is like an ancient storyline.
Well, yeah, especially in comics, there's quite a lot of, stories of people who created characters who, especially now, thanks to, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, are fairly well known and who famously got basically nothing for it. And yeah, Chip Zdarsky's using it to talk about those things, he's using it to talk a bit about his own experience as a comic creator. But yeah, it's definitely got a point of view about screwed over comic creators, but it manages not to come across as a polemic. The most impressive part about this is it's really, really readable and compelling, even though it's quite low key, as I think I said. It's not. He doesn't use the superhero elements to force in some action scenes by having chunks from the superhero comic or something. It really is just about this family, this old guy and his two young adult cusping middle-aged sons and their strained relationship with each other, and plus a few other surrounding cast who drift in. The most impressive part about it, is that it is just a story about this family in the same level of low key as probably something like 6 Feet Under, and it's incredibly compelling as a comic. Probably one of my favourite things I've read in the last few months.
Oh, that sounds great. It sounds really good. Interesting that he's gone from Batman to this, I suppose. It shows real range as a writer.
Yeah, I mean, he's always had a lot of range. I mean, I don't think I ever recommended it to you. I assume you're not familiar with the comic Sex Criminals.
No, I am not familiar with Sex Criminals, comics or otherwise.
Thank you for getting that disclaimer in. I am merely familiar with the comics. Yeah, it was a sort of sex comedy about these couple who discover that they have the power to stop time when they orgasm, and they use it to, among other things, rob banks. Sex Criminals, see what they did there.
No, I get it.
Yeah, and it was, again, both a sort of surprisingly nuanced drama about these two adults and the strange relationship they have with both sex and the wider world, and at times quite a silly comedy. They used the opportunity to throw in quite a lot of weird sex jokes. And yeah, Chip Zdarsky's swung between, often quite silly comedy work and this sort of serious drama stuff, and yeah, he's to the great envy of us all, he's incredibly good at them both. He's probably in the last decade or so especially gone from being just a guy who's known for drawing the silly comics to probably one of the most respected creators in the mainstream. It's impressive.
Yeah, I believe we've discussed him before on the show. I definitely remember discussing the artist and writer working on Batman and Daredevil. Possibly as just a brief recommendation section, or maybe we discuss an adaptation of his work. But this is, I believe, not the first time we discussed Chip Zdarsky.
He's someone who may well come up. He's been very prominent in the field in the last decade or so, which is obviously when we've been podcasting gloriously about it occasionally. But yeah, no, he's very good. If I haven't recommended you his stuff, the day may well come. Because yeah, he's very good. And this new comic, which is also available on his Substack if you want to pay a subscription fee, but after being initially serialised on his Substack, is now also out through Image Comics. I think the first collection is due in the next month or two.
Yeah, this sounds really good. It sounds like something I would definitely like. Like you say, if it's in the kind of Succession, 6 Feet Under family drama vibe, both of which shows I really enjoyed.
Yeah, it's a nice combination of that, and there are some good jokes in there, but it's not a silly book. It does go quite heartfelt on the family drama. And again, the fact that Chip Zdarsky is very familiar with the field of comics and superhero adaptations and stuff means he can talk about this stuff in a way that makes it clear that he actually understands it and isn't making like surface level jokes. So yeah, it works really well.
Yeah, sounds great.
It is very good. Right, and that's me. Alistair, what have you consumed?
So I've got another non-English language film to recommend. This time from Netflix. I watched their new version of All Quiet on the Western Front, which is billed very much as, a big screen, or small screen, I guess, if you watch it at home, adaptation of the classic novel, which it is. Interestingly, they've, in the marketing, not made any reference to the very famous film from, I believe, the 1930s. That was also adapted from the book, but this is kind of like going back to the book. Yeah, German novel about a group of young idealistic schoolboys who joined the German army in the First World War, with dreams of glorifying themselves and their nation and capturing Paris before Christmas and things like that. And then they discover the horrors of war. It's a really good film. It's quite dark. It's quite heavy. I mean, really from the opening battle sequence, of them going over the top through to the final battle at the end, it is really, really gripping. It's a sort of 2 hours and a half. So it's a long film, but yeah, it really zips by because obviously, plenty of gruesome battles thrown in to keep you entertained. Yeah,
I have no experience of either version. They've resisted the temptation to make a whole mini-series out of it then and really stretch it out. Yeah, no, this is a straight-up, long film adaptation. Being a book, they could have spun it out to be a series. But no, this is a film, possibly contender for Best Foreign Language Oscar film next year. I wouldn't be surprised. It's very, very good. Or maybe a candidate even for the token non-English language film that's included in the Best Picture nominees. Yeah, I'm surprised it's not getting more exposure. Netflix aren't pushing it harder. Maybe they're pushing it harder in Germany. But it is, I don't know, it's up there with the great gripping war films from sort of Saving Private Ryan to Full Metal Jacket. I mean, there's usually a reliable audience for that stuff, so hopefully those people know it exists. Yeah, and it's interesting that we are getting now more World War I films after the centenary of World War I. I mean, we had 1917 a few years ago. Yeah, but filmmakers are much more... Wonder Woman, famously. Wonder Woman with the First World War setting as well, yeah. Filmmakers are much more focused on the Second World War, but there seems to be a wave possibly triggered by the centenary of people focusing on World War I. But yeah, this really, I don't know, gets across the pointlessness of it. How the fighting at the end of the war was only a few miles from where the fighting had been at the beginning of the war, how pointless the loss of life is. There are some very tragic deaths in this film. I'm not going to spoil who lives, who dies, but yeah, there are some very tragic and rather pointless deaths that occur to some characters, so have your handkerchiefs ready. Yeah, if there's one thing I know about World War I, thanks to the war poetry I read at school, it's that there was lots of pointless death. But it's interesting to see, the story from the German side. When the version was made in the 30s, not long after the First World War, it was, I think, quite radical to do a film from the German perspective of the war. Again, it's not something we see so often. It's a very famous German novel, and, this is a very good adaptation of it. Okay, cool. I'm glad they did it justice. Yeah, so we'll see if this makes the top films of the year. It's certainly up there with some of the best things I've seen this year. Certainly if you're a fan of war films or interested in the First World War or German cinema, watch this. Yeah, it's on Netflix. It's not exactly a fun night in, but it is a very good film. Well, time is ticking away, so if you think it's on the best films list now, it's probably got a good chance. Yeah, this is definitely the sort of time when the Oscar films come out. Again, like The Wonders come out. I assume they're aiming that at Oscars. She Said is dropping soon again. They're probably aiming that at Oscars. White Noise, The Whale, sort of the ones I think that are aimed at
the Oscar shortlist are happening right now.
It's a good point, actually. I could actually get off my arse and watch The Wonder if I want my end-of-year list to include something other than superhero films.
I'll leave that at your discretion.
Tune in about... Oh god, we're actually quite near it now, aren't we? Tune in about 2 or 3 episodes' time to see if that happens. Jesus Christ, the year's dissolved.
Yeah. No, it's pretty much over. Yeah, I think 3 episodes' time. That's the end of the finale.
The end of everything.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone. Okay, and first up in this episode, it's time for Black Panther Wakanda Forever, the final of this year's Marvel Cinematic Universe films, also the last full film in Phase 4, and of course, the sequel to Black Panther. I think probably one of the bigger and more significant cultural events in the Marvel canon. This was the enormous blockbuster from a few years back, introducing the fictional African nation of Wakanda, along with its massive supporting cast, led at the time by the excellent Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa, aka the Black Panther. Boseman has, of course, sadly passed away a couple of years back, and now we're back with a sequel in which the supporting cast try to pick up and carry on without him, in the face of both their grief and an unfortunately timed invasion by a man who lives under the sea. We have seen this new epic film. Alistair, what did you think of it?
I mean, they were given the unenviable task of making a sequel to, again, as you say, one of the more popular films in the franchise without the leading man, someone who, had been very well received. And I guess the thing is that they managed to pull it off. They, should deserve lots and lots of applause and praise for Ryan Coogler, the director, the cast, and I guess everyone who worked on it, that it actually all kind of comes together. The film opens with his sister, Shuri, struggling to save her brother's life as he's dying of an illness. And then, a lot of the rest of the film is her processing her grief and the emotions with the fact that she can seemingly do everything with science apart from, save her family, the thing that matters most. And she lost her father in the first film. And this film really focused on her as a character, builds her out. She's a strong character. It helped that there were a lot of characters in the previous film, meant that there were a lot of people they could bring back, and everyone got to have their sad moments about how much they missed T'Challa. So they managed to pull this together, and it is an entertaining film. Full marks for what must have been a difficult challenge.
Yeah, no, I think it's, as you say, a tribute to the quality of the world building and the depth of the bench, as they say in American sports, in this film. That, you can take the lead character out of it and it still can be made to work. There's enough good, well-developed characters in this that even without T'Challa, and indeed Daniel Kaluuya's character also does not reappear, and yet we're still fine, it seems. We're mostly led here by, Letitia Wright as Shuri and Angela Bassett as Ramonda. And it's really good. It's a 2-hour, 40-minute film I was following avidly throughout and very rarely felt annoyed or bored by, which honestly is a good review in itself from me. I must admit, after seeing the running time of this, I did sigh a little after 2 Marvel films that did come in as a nice tight, comparatively speaking, 2 hours. But no, I thought they did a decent job of providing the right story to fill the space. There's a lot going on, but just about, not too much. And crucially, it manages to lean into the real-world circumstances around it without seeming exploitative or mawkish. It always feels quite thoughtful and engaged with that. There's always a real sense of what's hanging over the characters, again, without feeling like they're, in my inexpert opinion, as someone who is not, a member of Chadwick Boseman's family, exploiting him or anything. It feels, it's difficult to say, and it's probably a lot of this is credit to, the creative team, especially the director and the actors. But it always feels like it's kind of about T'Challa's death without mentioning it in every damn scene. And that's one of the things that makes it really compelling, and it's really good. I really, really enjoyed it. It's probably one of the better Marvel films in Phase 4. Yeah,
it could be, I think, probably the best film they've done so far this year. I mean, it works well that, Shuri's a character who kind of pushes her emotions down, so it means that the film isn't overloaded with sadness and things like that, but it's always there, and she's in the first shot of the film and she's in the last shot of the film, and it does focus it very much around her character journey and what makes a film more than just a action blockbuster that's kind of distracting and but ultimately forgettable. What makes a film more engaging than, say, going on a roller coaster, other than film lasts longer, is that the kind of emotional connection you can forge with the characters. And I did really feel I was with Shuri and her grief, and that, I felt that she was going through something. The kind of character moments, really worked well. Again, she's becoming a superhero. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that, a lot of her arc is taking on the mantle of the Black Panther. There's various bits when she says, she's so angry and upset that, if she thinks about it too much, she may destroy the world, which is an accessible emotional state, but also it ties into the kind of superhero nature of great power, great responsibility. So the film is working on these emotional levels as well as telling an entertaining action story. So I guess the really good action adventure films is intersecting strong character emotions with an exciting plotline involving baddies and action scenes and explosions and spaceships and stuff.
Well, yeah, and if anything, the removal of the obvious big main superhero character man has almost made this film be forced to become more different and more ambitious. Although Shuri is probably the main, most featured character, it's not a solo Shuri movie in the same way that Black Panther was kind of still arguably a solo T'Challa movie. There is a slightly more of a feeling of the ensemble cast here, the sense that it's about this whole family of characters, this group, and this sort of political dynamic between Wakanda and the rest of the world. And if anything, it always makes it more of a sort of ambitious sci-fi fantasy story than it did before, which is impressive. It feels very controlled, it feels very carefully written. Honestly, we saw Thor Love and Thunder a few months back, and although I'm less down on that film than many, there's no denying that film feels a bit rough and scrambly, and like they might just be having things happen at random or making them up as they go along. And this feels quite careful and thoughtful in a good way.
Yeah, no, exactly. And they've introduced characters in the previous film, which, means they can develop them here and give them more of a sense. Yeah, obviously we discussed Shuri. I thought Angela Bassett was excellent, playing, T'Challa and Shuri's mother. Again, a great performance in sort of understated grief. Yeah, occasionally exploding into moments of volcanic emotion, which, Angela Bassett's been around for a very long time. She's very talented. She's great in this sort of role. Most of the supporting cast are very good. I guess my only criticism, and I guess we come to it, is that I did feel that the villain, the character's Namor, the actor is Tensho Hurita. I'm not sure on the pronunciation of that. Sorry if I messed it up. I did feel he was a little wooden. I liked the new villains they introduced. I guess the two problems they had with it is, number one, he has to follow up Michael B. Jordan in the last film, again, delivering possibly one of the great Marvel Cinematic Universe performances, definitely in the kind of top few performances across all MCU films. So difficult to follow up. And also, the villains in very much this are like an outside force. They introduce a new, technologically advanced secret civilization that's an enemy of Wakanda. And although that's quite interesting, the fact that the villain is exterior, rather the previous film was both a family drama and a superhero film, the villain doesn't seem to tie quite so neatly into the emotional arc of the story. That's my main real criticism, although it wasn't by any means a deal breaker for me.
I don't know, they're brewing this sort of conflict with Wakanda and the rest of the world, and it kind of feels like they're thinking in some sort of trilogy terms, and we'll probably see that come to a head in the hypothetical third film, but they haven't yet confirmed, but will surely end up making. And yeah, I didn't dislike the guy playing Namor as much as you did. I thought he carried it okay. It wasn't, the inevitable comparisons with Michael B. Jordan are always going to be a hard one to live up to, but I quite liked the idea of these characters and the way they've clearly put a lot of thought into how you can bring in another, secret, technologically advanced civilization without them just coming off as knockoff Wakanda. There's a lot that's very interesting and different about Namor and his civilization, and especially as someone with vague knowledge of the comics, I'm quite impressed by how they've worked on and developed this to make them feel a bit more nuanced, because the bits I've read of Namor and his civilization in the comics haven't had as much force as this, although admittedly I'm not a Namor scholar, so please do not hurt me, Namor fans.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of interesting stuff going on here. Even at the moments when it wasn't working perfectly, it was still very entertaining. I liked that they had this very specific aesthetic for Namor and his underwater civilization. I guess it's a sort of Aztec futurism or Latino futurism. There's the sense of Wakanda has a Afrofuturistic aesthetic to it, which is one thing from the previous film that people responded to really well. They just kind of really dug the look and feel of Wakanda, including, I think, which we singled out in our review of Black Panther. And this new civilization needs to feel different to Wakanda, but also different to our world. It needs to exist in like a third space, not Afrofuturist, not just an extension of the regular world. It has to be like another thing. And the way they've sort of weaved in this Aztec Mayan aesthetic into this technologically advanced underwater civilization is really impressive and visually stunning.
Yes, and the way they've worked it so they have a direct conflict with Wakanda is quite well done. Yeah, the Black Panther Namor conflict is kind of a bit of a classic in the comics, because they're both, I guess, monarchs of these civilizations, and Namor is, in the comics, famously a bit of a prick. To be honest, he's a bit more of an aloof prick in the comics than he is here. But I don't know whether there was a conscious decision to just not play it that way or not. But he does get some of that in.
Yeah, absolutely. He's fine as a villain. There's some good action scenes and stuff. Again, yeah, the use of water sort of adds, like, again, a whole nother sort of dimension to the story. I mean, I think as we said before, one of the great strengths of the MCU is they keep coming up with new interesting ways to hold your attention. Something, you know, they haven't quite done before. There's always these fresh ideas. And yeah, this is another example of how they're digging through the, you know, enormous reservoir of Marvel properties to find something that they can come up with some interesting ideas combined. Yeah, again, a talented director like Ryan Coogler doesn't help to have him involved. But yeah, ways to keep the films interesting and keep the audiences coming back for more.
And since you've mentioned Ryan Coogler, I will say this film looks great. There's a real massive, stately, epic scale to it, which I think Ryan Coogler does really well. And, you know, some Marvel films get a bit of shit for looking cheap or being shot in car parks or whatever. There's a lot of scope to this, which does help carry through this sort of sense of the sci-fi fantasy epic, which, after a few Marvel films which are perhaps settled for just being kind of silly adventures, I think this one really taking itself seriously and going, no, this is a big fucking deal. This is a serious film where people are at least serious about what's happening. And Ryan Coogler's direction sells that, and it looks great and it feels important in its way.
Yeah, I mean, what people responded well to, again, yeah, including us, with the previous film was it felt like this was like a whole world you were going into. Like, Wakanda felt like a real place. It didn't feel like something that only had like 3 rooms to it. You know, it felt like a whole nation with architecture and cityscapes and people and customs and history and technology and, you know, everything that's, you know, the kind of world building that kind of makes great sci-fi and fantasy. And this is obviously very much present here. There's not quite the need to introduce as much. I mean, it's crazy that in the years since the last Black Panther film, like Wakanda has become like something that most people are familiar with, and it's like you see it referenced in like sitcoms and things like that because it's become like a cultural chit, you know, like an understandable meme. And again, like the sense of that whole world is back, you know, a whole country with political factions within it, you know, cultures, political struggles, its own language. And then he does it again with the underwater civilization. So yeah, again, you really get the sense of like we're opening up whole new worlds here.
Yeah, and without a lot of the self-aware humour of this is a bit silly, isn't it? He's like, no, this is a serious metaphor, this is serious business, pay attention.
Yeah, there's almost a complete absence of the Marvel quips, you know, the kind of action plus banter. You know, there's a few funny moments. You know, it's not po-faced and dry like, you know, a Batman film.
There's a few. The M'Baku character gets a few good moments of levity. He seems to be very much the designated figure of levity in this film, the one who isn't sad but not completely destroyed by T'Challa's death and is therefore able to occasionally have fun.
Yeah, and, you know, there is, as you say, humour, but, you know, I felt not only obviously they're dealing with death and processing grief, so there is a call for a more serious tone, but even with the previous film, there was this sense of like, you know, this is something we're taking seriously and, you know, it's still fun, you know, there's still great action scenes, you know, the characters have real charisma. Like I say, it's not trying to be maudlin, but it is expecting you to take the, you know, the situation of the world seriously as like a complete world, you know, kind of more like the tone that Dune struck as well.
And you know it's good when Alistair compares it to Dune.
Yes, that's a good sign. Yeah.
But yeah, but in terms of like, yeah, what you're saying about the Marvel tone, I think one of the things I was interested to see in this film is how they handled, you know, throwing other Marvel stuff into it. Like, you know, things that seem like they kind of more obviously there to promote the wider universe. And they do, I think, correctly realise that this probably isn't the film to go wild with the cross-promotion. There's a couple of bits, like, it introduces the character of Ironheart, played by Dominique Thorne, who gets a sort of side story origin here in a similar way to how T'Challa himself, in fact, did in Captain America Civil War. Her origin sort of takes place around this film. And yeah, it's decent enough. It could have felt shoehorned, but she does feel more or less like she's actually got something to do here other than to hold up a sign saying, please watch my show. Yeah,
which is again how they handled, yeah, exactly as you say, Black Panther in the Captain America Civil War. It's a film with a lot of characters in it. And they made the bold decision to introduce more characters. Obviously, they introduced a new villain, but yeah, they broadened it out. Which again, bold decision. There was at one point when I kept feeling like, I was thinking, oof, more characters? Is this really what a film of this size needs? But then by the end, I was like, no, that worked. Every character was woven in, had a complete arc. You felt you went on a journey with them. You always knew where you were with each character in their story. Each scene kind of drove forward the characters as well as the plot. So yeah, again, very well handled. And I was left walking away thinking that, like, yeah, you know, wouldn't cut any characters. I'd probably be up for the Ironheart TV show, which will inevitably happen next year.
Yep, and in other little bits of MCU connective tissue, Julia Louis-Dreyfus pops up again, playing her role as Countess Fontaine, who doesn't really do any, massive shout-outs to her ongoing story here. It kind of feels like she's basically the new Nick Fury, a slightly less trustworthy Nick Fury as a general sort of official governmental presence in Marvel stuff. And yeah, it's a nice enough way of providing some sense of a shared universe and continuity, but without any honking footnotes saying to be continued in Thunderbolts.
Yeah, I mean, we enjoyed, dissecting, the Marvel criminology of it and the kind of the Marvel this and the other that's going on, especially in the pub after a film. That's something that we enjoy and discussing it here. But I guess one of the things I would say is you don't have to really appreciate any of this stuff to enjoy this as a film. It's a sequel, so yeah, it's best that you've seen Black Panther. But if you've only really seen Black Panther or just casually dipped in and out of the MCU, you can just pick this up and you don't need to know who the characters are getting their own shows are. You don't need to know that this character's Ironheart, who has their own show next year. This character's appeared in Falcon and Winter Soldier and is in a film. That stuff is all there very much for the fans to dig into, and yeah, obviously it's part of the MCU and their brand, but they do appreciate that good storytelling and good characters for this film comes first, especially in this instance. There isn't an overburdening of stuff to set up. There's focus on telling this particular story.
Oh yeah, there's partly the recognition of, obviously Chadwick Boseman's death makes it even less tasteful to use this as a massive billboard for other Marvel stuff. And even without that, I think the success of the first Black Panther and the way it achieved a certain cultural importance, I think maybe makes them keener to try and push this as something of a standalone franchise rather than part of the wider thing. Even though, to be fair, they did also shove loads of Black Panther into the two big Avengers films, Endgame and Infinity War, so they're clearly not above it. But the Black Panther films themselves, more or less standalone.
Yeah. I think Ryan Coogler is a great director. There was recently a retrospective of his work at the BFI, which is a pretty high honour to be bestowed upon a filmmaker by the British filmmaking establishment. He's done a lot of great films. He did the first Creed film with Michael B. Jordan, which was very, very good. And obviously here his flair for both detailed characterization, creating complex characters, and also, world building and visual flair kind of all come together. I mean, he's got Disney pockets, especially when Disney turn on the spending taps, but he's got the imagination and skills to really kind of make that work.
And yeah, there have been a few directors who have had big successful Marvel films and clearly been brought back for a sequel with a certain amount of cachet and freedom to do whatever they fancy without quite as much oversight. And often in the past, it's sometimes led to films that have felt a bit indulgent or flabby. And on this occasion, I think Ryan Coogler's done a good job. I think he's made a follow-up that doesn't feel like an obviously lesser sequel. It feels like, I don't know, I'm probably too early on to tell you if it's actually better or worse, but it feels like a worthy successor at least.
I mean, I do feel to some degree that's what happened with Thor, Love and Thunder.
That was one of the ones I was talking about, yeah.
Yeah, I assumed it was. But as with you, I enjoyed it more than the critical consensus. I feel out of step with the fellow critics on that one, but I do feel that the sort of...
It's not as good as Ragnarok, is it?
It's not as good as Ragnarok. I mean, that's just the long and short way of putting it. And maybe it's because there was not enough oversight, or maybe it's just because it's hard to do something as good as Ragnarok twice. But what I can say is it's hard to do something as good as Black Panther twice, and Ryan Coogler and co have managed it. So.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the metric of any of this is, but if you haven't seen Wakanda Forever, it's worth seeing. I'd say it does look really good, so there are worse things to do than see this on a cinema screen.
Yes, I'd recommend seeing this on the cinema screen. Again, it's, benefits from that, big screen experience. Yeah, it was interesting to see that in the audience, the crowd, it was absolutely packed screen, and they were screening it all day at the cinema we went to.
It was on a Tuesday night as well. Not the natural cinema day, but our cinema was in central London was rammed.
And there seemed to be a wider cross-section than the usual Marvel nerds, with a long film as well. For a long film in a big cinema, you can really tell if people's attentions are wandering, if people are checking their phones or rustling their popcorn more. And there was not really any moments, the whole place was wrapped.
Yeah, no, actually, everyone was. I must admit, when I realised it was quite full and there was quite a lot of chat and buzz during the trailers, I was a bit, oh god, it's one of those times where I spend the entire film glaring at people. But no, everyone was completely silent, which is, I guess, a sign of A, how much people like this property, and B, how genuinely good and attention-holding this film is. Right, okay, and last up today, it's The Bear, the widely critically beloved TV show which aired, I think, originally on Hulu in the States and Disney Plus here. This is, of course, the story of Kami the Bear Bizzato, a young chef who used to work at one of the most acclaimed restaurants in America, but has come back to run his brother's restaurant after his tragic death. And he's very much bringing a certain hardcore intensity to the already high-pressure environment of this tiny and incredibly busy kitchen. And yes, this is a story about him trying to make peace with both his brother's death and his own ridiculously high blood pressure. We have both seen this show. It's been, as I said earlier, widely critically acclaimed, and so, we wanted to get it in before the end of year lists, and once we decided to watch it, we of course had to use that to produce content. Alistair, what did you think of this show?
So this feels very different to some of the things that we've been discussing recently. I mean, it's a long way from, Doctor Who, Rings of Power, House of the Dragon, not because those are fantasy shows, but they're shows with large casts, events happening in usually like lots of different locations, kind of spread out with this sort of big broad tapestry. And this feels very different because it's very condensed. It's focused on one business, primarily, the kitchen of this one business. Just a small group of characters who mainly interact in that kitchen. It's very focused. I mean, it's billed as a comedy drama, and it, has that kind of sitcom tightness of like writing and staging, that like really limited locations, limited cast. And it's really, really intense. I mean, like the drama is powerful, hard hitting, the performances are great. You can really believe you're there in this kitchen. The tension's really high. Yeah, this is a great show. This is going to be one of those episodes where we're just full of praise of things.
Yeah, it's true. High level of positivity in moderate fantasy violence this fortnight. Yeah, I love this as well. It was a combination of the sort of twitchy intensity of Uncut Gems and, again, actually, the issue-ridden family sagas of many HBO shows, similar to what I said earlier about Public Domain. But yeah, I think what I like most about this is the way the characters just sort of carry it. Like some shows, you can really see the tracks of the plot as it shoves you along. And in The Bear, characters just do things because it's in character, and that causes a story to emerge. That's not just something The Bear has invented, that's what happens on, good TV shows. But yeah, very prominent here and very well done, and the incredibly high pressure environment of the kitchen just allows things to just happen and then people just stumble into it. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. I thought the way you slowly but surely get to know and care about this fairly large ensemble over the course of these quite fast-paced episodes is very, very well handled. And yeah, by the second half of the season, I was finding it quite hard not to be like legitimately emotionally on edge during every single episode, waiting for either something awful to happen or emotionally, I guess, someone to have a breakdown or some disaster to happen in the kitchen. Like even the ones where not much actually happened, I was like sort of waiting for it. It was great. Yeah, I really enjoyed watching this. Honestly, my biggest criticism is there's not more of it.
Yeah, and I'm very excited for a series too. I watched the penultimate and ultimate episode back to back, which is quite a stressful experience. We're definitely in Uncut Gems territory of the tension is so high, this is actually actively unpleasant at some points. Like it kind of like stops almost being fun. But also, yeah, the level of rage and anger. I mean, like it's kitchens. The first ever job I had that was paid was in a kitchen, just like taking out food, I guess being a caterer. And yeah, they are stressful places. People shout, people get angry, people do a lot of drugs. People, which is I guess one of the themes of the show. Tempers run high and there's a lot of energy and like needed, and but also they've come up with a great believable premise. It's a failing restaurant. They have to work even hard to save it. There's tensions between the head chef and owner who's inherited this restaurant from his brother, and their cousin who was more involved with the restaurant and feels he should run it and also has more ideas. There's division between the owner head chef who's gone to New York to learn this sort of Heston Blumenthal style, like insane gastronomic science wizardry cooking, versus the guy who wants to keep it as just sort of beefing bread for builders, teachers sort of place. They're weaving in these themes like gentrification and all of it. So yeah, it's tackling a lot through the medium of raised voices over fryers.
Well, yeah, and that all plays into the emotional storyline as well, because obviously a lot of his cousin who works in the kitchen and was very, very close with their lead character's brother, when he says he wants to keep it the same, a lot of that is he wants it to be a sort of permanent memorial to the brother, and it just gets very intense and at times very sad. And there's other characters who are caught in the crossfire to varying degrees of this.
Yeah, and there's there's characters who want to change things and they want to better themselves. The main guy brings in a new chef, Sydney, who's again, she's young, she's ambitious, she wants to make good food, she wants to turn the place around, but yeah, she's butting up against the guy who's got some sort of class pretensions in the sense of there's nothing better than good honest food for working class people. We're not going to make this into some kind of hipster joint where middle-class people ironically come to eat Heston Blumenthal tarted up versions of working-class food. There's that tension building below the surface, and yeah, it's a very tense environment. So yeah, it's a sort of environment where characters do shout at each other a lot, so that works for the drama.
Yeah, and I quite like the way that it sort of turns that around during the course of the series, in that the Sydney character is the sort of character who's, easy to show as in the right in this sort of show, when she's coming up against the older cousin guy who is a bit aggressively wants things to stay the same, partly because he's a very stuck in his ways guy and partly for psychological reasons, and she wants to, make changes which you could sort of understand are to make the place better or more efficient, and you're sort of naturally on her side, and then as the series goes on you get, I don't know, you sort of start to get more of his point of view, and she honestly starts treating him quite snottily, and even that becomes more complicated, even though towards the beginning that's, if anything, one of the more simple conflicts.
Yeah, exactly. And ask a middle class person who's kind of into like hipster eateries and like gastronomic cooking and things like that, my sympathies naturally lie with the man and the woman's who want to change the restaurant and make it be all it could be with excellent food. And then you kind of think like this meat-headed guy who just wants to shout and say things must always stay the same. You think of him as like he's the villain of the piece, and it's easy to cast him in those roles, which is how it begins. But over time they develop the characters. You realise that this aggressive, shouty guy, who's resistant to change, conservative, certainly small c character, you kind of understand where he's coming from, and he gets developed. And, it's not like they don't do it in a heavy-handed way when there's just a big sort of shovel of character development that makes someone a accessible character. Over time you get to know the characters better, then you understand where they're all coming from, and then you sympathise with all of them, which is the cleverness of the writing.
Yeah, the steady growth, yeah. Like the lead trio, I think they're kind of the lead three characters of, Jeremy Allen White as Kami, Ebon Moss-Backrack as Richie, and Io Ezebiri as Sydney are the core three pillars of this argument, and they all do a great job at building these three different kinds of obsessed, driven people who you kind of admire but also maybe don't want to be around.
Yeah, and they all do great performances. Yeah, again, you can really see the throbbing temple veins, like they're going to explode at some point, and you get a real sense of who they all are as people. A good comparison is Mad Men, again, which sort of swerved away from the kind of heavy-handed exposition character dumps. But over time, if you watch enough episodes, you really get to know the characters as really three-dimensional people and understand exactly where they're coming from with everything they say.
Yeah, that's good. Ebon Moss-Backrack also in Andor recently, in which he was also very good, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, and he was also in The Punisher, along with John Bernthal, who cameos here in a couple of episodes, which was... Again, that's how you do a famous actor cameo. Have him briefly in a couple of flashbacks, not stealing the limelight from the main characters, but at that moment you go like, fuck me, it's John Bernthal.
Well, it's one of those things that kind of works, because kind of the idea of the character John Bernthal's playing is that he's a very big guy. He was kind of the guy holding everyone together. He was a very huge, charismatic presence in their lives. So bringing in someone who just draws the eye and sucks the oxygen into himself, like John Bernthal, does create that impression quite quickly.
Absolutely.
And also they had Joel McHale from Community playing the lead character's old boss in a random flashback, so clearly they're not above bringing in very famous people in quite small parts. Yes,
again, that's a tiny character that absolutely makes a huge impression on you. Absolute nightmare of a boss. Who ran the comparison made before, the Heston Blumenthal guy who's the sort of runs this world-class restaurant is probably a genius, but is also an absolute nightmare to work with. For the record, I'm not saying Heston Blumenthal's like that. I'm just saying he's that he's that kind of visionary and that kind of extremely expensive 3 Michelin star only taster menus are available kind of restaurant.
Yeah, technically speaking, it's great. I like the steady atmosphere of it, the constant cutaways to different parts of the restaurants, the incredibly fast cuts, except, of course, the penultimate episode, which is all shot in one take, which is ludicrous.
Yeah.
One single... I looked this up because there have been, amazingly enough, think pieces about this. The one single 18-minute take that makes up the penultimate episode of this season to really drive home the nightmarishness of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And also, during that penultimate episode, as well as it being a single 18-minute take, there's this noise they play throughout the episode which just gets steadily louder and louder. Like maybe in universe it's meant to be a boiling pot or something, but it sounds like a fucking scream. It really doesn't make it any less tense.
Yeah, the sound design is absolutely brilliant. Again, bringing in all the noise and hassle of the restaurants and the sort of the ding of the checks coming in as people order, things like that. The sound design is brilliant, as well as the diegetic sound being really, really good. This show also has a great soundtrack. I heard Radiohead at one point, Van Morrison, and excellent use of the opening of New Noise by Refused, the sort of rapid guitar riff that sounds like there's just the sound of blood pressure rising. Refused is a bit of a deep cut. Shape of Punk to Come is an amazing album, but yeah, it was great to hear Refused on the soundtrack. Full marks, music choice wise.
Yeah, they also played an R.E.M. song from one of the later, less well-known albums, which, as a bit more of an R.E.M. fan, I appreciate.
Yeah. So yeah, it really is something firing on all cylinders. It's small, it's tight, it's focused on the workplace. But I really did like this. I felt something different to the kind of big, expansive, say premium dramas we talked about, Succession, things like that. What most of these shows have in common, the ones that really work, from Succession, House of the Dragon, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, is there is the focus on the family and the core characters of the family, which is what they have here. Not only the dead brother and the sort of cousins who are the main characters, but also the kind of found family of the workplace and the kitchen especially. A kitchen where people really work together, cheek to jowl, and a kitchen in a business that people love as well as work at. So this family nature of it is, a source of great drama, and it's used well here.
Yeah, and the sort of emotional intensity of this sort of character growth and acknowledgement of trauma and stuff, as I've said before, get me to like this point of emotional rawness and wring some tears out of me, and you'll probably get a good review. And so it is again. And
as we've said before on the podcast, especially if you said, is that sitcoms and workplace make great settings because there's people who you can't get away from, so you have to live with them. And families are the same. Again, your family, you've got to live with them. You can't, leave them. So a workplace that's also a family business is just kind of sort of stacking the emotional dynamite to the ceiling and then lighting the fuse.
But yeah, no, this is great viewing. This is very intense, very propulsive. There's lots of nice sort of shots of food. Some which make it look like luscious and edible. Some that are like really vicious shots of things being chopped and cooked.
Yeah, they're fond of their sort of like quick cut to a carrot being diced or something like that, yeah.
But yeah, a good show. Not a relaxing show, but a very good show.
Yeah. If you really feel your blood pressure going up as you watch. That's all we have time for this episode. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have enjoyed this episode, please make sure you leave us a review in your podcatcher of choice so other people can find out about the show. If you want more from us, you can visit our website, which is moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want still more shorter things than the written pieces on the website, you can go to our social media profiles at Twitter MFV Podcast and Facebook Moderate Fantasy Violence, where we will tell you such things as we liked this and the podcast is running late. But it has only happened a couple of times. And if you want more from me, you can find me on Twitter as @NickMB, or on Facebook at Nick Bryan Writes, or on the general internet at nickbryan.com, where you will be able to buy my new comic Death of a Necromancer as soon as I have finished posting it out to my beloved Kickstarter backers. If you're listening to this, Kickstarter backers, by the time we release this episode, probably at least 3/4 of you will probably be in the post. Maybe more.
I've got my copy and I'm very excited to read it.
See, not all bullshit.
If you want more from me, you can follow me on Twitter, where I'm at AlistairJRBall. And if you want even more from me, you can visit my website, which is redtrainblog.com. And if you want more from this podcast, you can join us in a fortnight's time, when we will be organising a rebellion against the evil Galactic Empire in Andor. And we will be having our minds thoroughly blown by 1899, the new show from the creators of Dark. So until then, enjoy watching TVs and films, and have a good one.
Bye.
That was well timed.
Tune in about 2 or 3 episodes time to see if that happens. Jesus Christ, the year's dissolved.
Yeah. No, it's pretty much over. Yeah, I think 3 episodes time. That's the end of the finale.
The end of everything.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, episode 179, I think, will be the finale.
Of everything.
Maybe not everything.
Everything. There we go.
Okay, cool. Right.
Nothing keeps the listeners like instilling a bit of existential dread.
Yeah.
That's what I heard at podcasting school. Shortly before they expelled me. Anyway.
Cool. Right.